Hey guys, Julian here, and today I'm going to be talking to you about how to make hard, bassy, sort of rumble kicks, and the more industrial hard techno style, sort of like our label group, Possession, like that more hard-hitting stuff that has a lot of texture to it, and also talking not just about how to make the rumble, because I've made a few videos talking about that in the past, but also about how to really give it some movement and some texture, because I think that a lot more of what you're hearing in the track is the kick than people think. Like, a lot of times people think the kick is just sort of like the kick and the bass, but there's a lot more going on. So today I'm going to be showing you how to make kicks like you heard in the intro. Now, to go along with this video, I've also just created a new sample pack called 20 Industrial Techno Kicks Volume 3. The link is right at the top of the description. You get 20 hard-hitting kicks for just $10. And with each kick, you can see I've got everything split out, so you get like just the bass, just the kick. So you really get everything that you need to work with these. Even some of these have like an extra layer in there. So yeah, it's kind of like construction loops where you can go and take these and take them apart and really see what's going on. But also you can build your own kicks with these, and you have full customizability because you've got the BPMs as well as the individual loops. The link is at the top of the description. I've also included this industrial bass percussion loop rack, which we're going to talk about today. It sounds kind of like a lot of words, but it'll make sense once you see the video. That's also included, so you get a lot of value here for just $10. The link's at the top of the description. Really helps support me so I can keep bringing you guys new information like this. And let's dive into the video. So I have here, this is the setup pretty much that I made all of these kicks with, and this is the setup that I would use to make a kick in this style. So what's happening here is we have just a pretty simple setup. It's the kick, the bass, which you can hear is pretty busy, and then we have a group with both of them. And then on the group, you'll notice we're not really using too much like saturation or drum busts or anything. You can get into a little bit of it. I did use it a bit, and I've done it a bit before in videos, but like, I really think if you start to do too much on the saturation, like maybe a little bit, like that could be good. But as we start to get too much, you can see it gets a little too crunchy. So we're really more focused on just getting like a really hard-hitting kick sample and getting the bass to sound really fat, so that we don't have to go and do all that extra stuff. It's like a lot of times when you're doing that extra stuff, it's to make up for the kick not being as good. Well, just get a really solid kick. But we do have this going through a little bit of compression. And actually, usually I would shy away from this, especially for like a kick, something that you want to have a really sharp transient. Again, it's all about the samples, not really the processing. But with this style, I've noticed that when I reference these kicks with other tracks that are on the labels I talked about, like, a lot of times if you don't do this, you just get this kind of disconnect between the kick and the bass. You can kind of see that there, how the green jumps a lot more when the kick hits and the bass is a little bit quieter. And you can turn the bass up, but it just never quite gets the same sort of blend like I hear in those tracks, unless you use the compressor. And you'll see it's not a lot, it's a very tiny amount, but what it's doing is it's taking those peaks of the kick and kind of just making it a bit more even and balanced with the bass. And that's the idea here. And the key to this is going to be using the attack, because the attack is essentially how long it's taking for the compression to kick in. So if you turn that up, you can get it out of the way of like the transient on the kick here. Sort of like this one-shot mode. Like if I turn up the fade in, you can see how that kind of makes it go like that. That's the exact same thing that we're doing with the attack on the compressor, but for the compression essentially. And yeah, so that's just a little detail, but I want to get right out of the way, like, not really too much on the group. It's really about what's going on individually. You can see I have my kick here, which is a nice hard-hitting kick. This is one of mine from my tutorials that I've layered. And to make these kinds of kicks, you know, it's really just about getting like good layers going into it. You know what I mean? Like, check some old sample libraries, maybe even sample stuff. Like a lot of those kind of like older hard techno tracks from the 90s and 2000s, as well as sample packs from that time, have really good samples for this. And then what you can do is you can do the layering like with like EQ3 like that, where we do like one layer that's just the mids and highs, and then another layer where it's the lows. And once you start playing around with different samples and layering them like that, like, you'll end up with pretty solid kicks like this as well. And I think that the layering gives you a certain element that you don't quite get in terms of fatness with just using like one sample. Like, putting these samples together is going to make these really full, and this is what I've done. But then you just end up with something really solid that you don't have to do too much extra stuff to. And then we have the bass. And so the bass is kind of where things get interesting, because like I was saying, I think with these kinds of tracks, you can get a lot of movement and a lot of like percussion and kind of groove in your track out of the bass. Because obviously, yeah, it's usually just like this rumbling, you know, just like a rolling kick. This is the same kick you saw up there. It's just got a little bit of a low pass filter on it. So obviously, you know, that's kind of like foundational. But then you can see, like, when we put the stuff on top of it, you just get so much more color and texture, and you can go crazier with this too. Like, you can make this like a bit harder, but it allows you to create these really interesting kind of like percussion loops, essentially, using your bass line. And that's the thing with these tracks, you know, if you're going to make a harder track, this isn't just about the kick, but this is about the overall arrangement and sort of setup of the track. You know, if you're going to make a harder track that's going to have like more distorted, hard-hitting sounds, you need kind of like to say more with less, essentially. Like, you need to be able to have one element be not just the bass, but also kind of have this like crunchy percussion on top, right? Let's play around with like that. And so this is a really great way to do that. So again, all that's happening is we have the kick just playing 16th notes. It's got a little bit of a low pass on it, which you don't need that. The beauty of this is that you can get a lot of different things. Like, you can play around. It's pretty much anything you want, but I've got that there. And then it's going into this rack. And this is the rack that I was talking about in the intro that's included with the sample pack. So this is essentially just multi-band distortion. What's happening is we have EQ3, kind of a similar method to what I showed you with the kick layering, where we have the highs on this one, in the mids, and then we have the lows. And you can see they're all being saturated differently. And so essentially, this allows you to do a few things. One, it kind of keeps things a lot cleaner, because like if I just want to distort this and I just put an overdrive on everything, you'll notice it kind of messes it up. Like, you get that nice textured sound, but it kind of messes up the low end, and it's not really going to sound that clear. So that's the first thing it does. You get a cleaner distortion, but also you get a lot more control here, and you can create a more complex sound. And again, like I was saying, using less to say more, that's a great way to do that. Now we're really using everything we have available in front of us, because obviously, like, you know, it's a pretty harmonically rich sound, right? Like, it's got highs, it's got mids, it's got lows. We can use that to create some interesting percussion, and so that's where this comes in. And like I said, this is a bit basic. Like, you can go crazier with this. You could, like, you know, harder distortion. You can put delay underneath it, maybe. Get some more movement. A lot can be done with this, but it's just, again, like taking what we have here and making the most of it. Like, a lot of times, the start of a track, like, it'll sound like there's like the kick, the bass, and a percussion loop. But you can kind of see how that works now. Like, these two alone, the kick and the bass, can create a lot of sound. And then after the rack, I have a bit of reverb, which this is kind of optional. You can just kind of play around with this. This is one of those things, kind of like the filter, where it's like just playing with different settings. But really, it's mostly this rack. And the last thing to really talk about with this rack here is also this low pass filter here that's happening on the highs. So like I was saying, this is able to create like a lot of sound and a lot of kind of interesting rhythms. What we're doing here is we're actually using a low pass filter which has an LFO on it. So here's without it. It's all just that same da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But now this LFO is happening on eighth notes, and it's the saw down, so it's just going dun 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 dun. And so there, it's a great way to add like an extra kind of movement on top of there. You know, again, it adds more nuance because we're able to add something just in the highs, but you still have that constant da-da-da-da. And really, like, when you hear texture in a track, texture is essentially just like different contrasting things happening, right? So to have one going dun 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 dun, but it's just kind of a background layer, and everything else is going dun 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 dun. Again, it's just adding like a lot of movement there. And then the key to that is just using a lot of saturation. Like, I've got the overdrive and I've got the filter drive here to just make that kind of come out a little bit more. Because if you don't distort it enough, you won't really get that kind of so you don't really hear it that much. But it's all about like having a little bit of resonance. You don't want to do too much like that, but essentially like just distorting the resonance. That's how you get that. And then the only other things on that are, you can see we have a compressor, which obviously is side chaining into the kick. You probably want to do that every time, because if you don't do that, it's going to be a bit messy. And then reverb is just, again, like adding a bit more texture to it. The secret is it's just like a really, really short reverb. And then I also have an EQ here, which is boosting a little bit of the low end, but you'll notice it's cutting at 21 hertz. So here's without this. And with it, we're also cutting off some highs with it. But you'll notice the bass just feels a little bit more airy with this. So this is something I've noticed, like a lot of hard techno tracks, they're actually cutting out a lot of those low frequencies. And when you look at them on the Spectrum, like if you use Ableton Spectrum plugin with some reference tracks, you'll see what I'm talking about. But essentially, yeah, like cutting that out, it just kind of cleans up your low end. Because the thing is, we're not really hearing a lot of those frequencies when they are in the track. But cutting it out is now creating all this much more headroom for the stuff that you actually do hear to come out. And so that's essentially what we're doing there. And then I just have a utility converting it to mono. So here's without that. And with it. So usually, yeah, you're going to want your bass to be in mono. You can sometimes play with, like, if you want the highs to be stereo, you can maybe put, like, something on that. But typically, just, like, you want to convert this to mono at the end. And yeah, if you follow these steps, you should be able to make a pretty nice hard techno kick in the style. Like I said, you know, not just creating the kick and a bass, but adding that extra bit of percussion to it and kind of texture, not only to make it unique, but also to make the most out of the elements that you do have in your track, so that you're not adding like a bunch of extra percussion loops that are going to mess up your track. Because with these harder tracks, you really need to keep things simple and kind of streamlined and not have too many things happening at once for it to have the most impact. So this is a great way to get multiple things out of one layer. And yeah, so that's going to be it for this one, guys. I hope you enjoyed. As always, make sure to like this video as well as subscribe, and let me know what you think of this video in the comments. Like I said in the beginning, you can get 20 Industrial Techno Kicks Volume 3 for just $10. The link is right at the top of the description on my Bandcamp. You can also get everything that you saw in this video, that percussion rack, as well as all these individual kicks. So you get a lot of stuff that you can work with, and you can layer these together and, you know, make a lot of different stuff. And as you can see, it creates some pretty interesting kicks. Thank you very much for all the support, everybody, and I will see you tomorrow with another video.